Hello, I'm Meghann Scully and welcome to Energise, a show that looks at sustainability in all its forms and what we can do to shape a clean energy future. On this episode, we're taking a look at sport. Ireland is a nation of sports lovers with 2 million Irish people regularly playing sport and many more involved as spectators and fans. It's the ideal space to bring people together to make big changes around sustainability and climate justice. From your local GAA or running club to professional teams with their idolised sports stars and huge budgets, right up to Irish national teams, sport has access to hearts and minds like nothing else. And we need those hearts and minds. I'm here with producer Connor.
Hi, Meghann.
And we had 2 great guests on this episode. Sean McCabe is Head of Climate Justice and Sustainability at Bohemian Football Club, and Oscar Carolan is a Sustainability Consultant.
Yeah, this episode was great. I think maybe we were kind of both saying before, we hadn't really thought too much about the link, I suppose, between sport and sustainability. And then I learned so much from this episode.
Yeah, it's not something I ever really thought about when I went out to play GAA as a child or when I went to visit Croke Park or the Aviva Stadium. But yet my eyes were very much so opened in this episode and some of the incredible work that's actually already been done.
What was really interesting to me about this was that it did the full spectrum. So, Oscar was talking both about the really small, the recycling and looking at sports pitches and all of that on kids' teams, all the way through then to the kind of bigger stuff at Leinster Rugby and the RFU and so on. And then all the way up to these sort of mega clubs and the things that they can do. And then Sean was sort of looking at the bigger picture again around kind of how do you utilise all of these. It's like the fans of some of these huge football teams are massive. There's so much that you could do if you can harness that, which is kind of what Sean was looking at.
And Bows as well they're absolutely leaders in change, and not just on the football field, but completely outside of that as well. And I feel like since I heard both of them, I've kind of looked at sport a little bit differently.
Yeah, and it's great. You can really see how much both Sean and Oscar love sport and love sustainability, and it kind of really comes into everything they're doing, which is amazing. So Oscar has a great story of how he got into sustainability in sports. Will we have a listen to what he has to say now?
Now, Oscar, before we delve into the world of sport and sustainability, tell us about your own role and title and what exactly you do.
Lovely to meet you, Meghann. I'm a sustainability consultant and I've been in the IT services industry for about 24 years, working for American corporations. And about 2 years ago, I decided, having worked in the sustainability strategy for a major American technology company, that I wanted to find something more purposeful in my life. And being a father of 3 boys who are sports fanatics, the direction I went in was kind of a little bit it wasn't so obvious at the time, but it has become more obvious that sport and its role in sustainability is a huge opportunity. And that's kind of where I started to lean into it a little bit. So over the last 2 years, I've obtained a master's in design thinking for sustainability. And I want to combine my corporate experience with some of that recent educational experience and try and find paths for organisations to make a positive impact for their environment, the planet and the communities that they operate in. Look, there's no planet B. We only have one place to live on, and there isn't an infinite set of natural resources. So we have a huge amount of an extraction psychology in the world that we live in, and it really comes to a point where we need to stop and pause and think about, what is the impact our daily activities, routines, and sporting endeavours has on the planet. So it was around 2 years ago where I actually had a little bit more free time to myself, and I was able to volunteer at my local boys football club, Harold's Cross Youth Football Club, get the plug in. And I was a fixture secretary there, and I was organising the weekend fixtures from our under 8s to our under 18s, boys and girls, every weekend. And I tell you, I got a real great buzz out of this, right? Because I was enabling the kids every weekend to go out and meet their pals, stay healthy, practice their teamwork skills, their leadership skills. And it was fantastic. And then around the November, December timeframe, I found I was cancelling match after match after match. Waterlogged pitch, and suddenly that pathway for kids to get out of the house every weekend was gone. So I said, well, look, what is sport's role in combating this? Sporting organisations, clubs, communities can't just be passive. So that was the kind of question I asked myself. What is sport's role in combating climate change?
So speaking there about waterlogged pitches. So what is the solution? Like, how can we, because it's obviously winter time, it's going to rain. Is there a solution?
Well, look, there's no silver bullet, but I think the opportunity for community clubs, the organisations, and even the national governing bodies is really to acknowledge that many of our sports, our field sports, are played on grass. Right? We need to be conscious around what is the natural environment around which we are playing our sports. But many clubs and national governing bodies are struggling on where do they start. And for me, there's really three areas that organisations can start to tackle this problem. Number one is, well, we're all consumers, right? So we all have our recycling bins and we might use the deposit return scheme. So as a consumer, we have an increased appetite for doing the right thing. However, when you get into that club environment, it's not necessarily clear how you can apply that methodology and mindset in a club or community environment. So establishing what are the sustainability opportunities a club has within their own four walls, within their own sporting area. And then the second area is around clubs and communities they participate in, and they run live events that involves the car to drive there. So how can you carpool? How can you have a deposit return scheme active in your club? So all of these elements, while they won't avoid the waterlogged pitch, it's changing people's mindset and bringing a greater awareness that through combined activity, we can all make a difference as well. And then the third area, if you scale that up from a club to a county to the GAA, for example, or the IRFU or the FAI, they have huge numbers of followers. Leinster Rugby, for example, have 1 million followers on their social media. The Dublin District Schoolboy League that my sons play in is the largest underage league in Europe. They have 45,000 players registered between 8 and 18. That's the next generation. How are the DDSL communicating to that audience around what's the right thing to do for your kit, your transport options, and your waste after each sporting event? So there's a couple of three actions that could be taken there at various different levels within a club or at a national level.
And I don't think the solution either is just taking up a lovely grass pitch and putting down effectively a fake grass, because that's not really environmentally friendly either. Or is it?
There is an increasing amount of clubs that are exploring and have installed all-weather pitches. So that could be a pitch that's for the football, the GAA, for the rugby as well. So that brings communities together. It absolutely needs to be done through proper planning procedures so as that there's a conscious decision around drainage and the biodiversity in the area. And it is a balance. But if you consider sport's role in well-being, COVID, cast your mind back. What were we all doing? Jogging, running. Sport and health and activity kept us all sane. So by providing an all-weather pitch, there's a positive effect on making sure that there's predictability in the kids getting out to play. And that predictability, that builds routine, and it also builds confidence, and it has a knock-on effect to the well-being of those children, which has potentially a positive effect on their future health, their cognitive skills, and their ability to work effectively in school and in future work. And you could argue a positive downstream effect to healthcare avoidance and making sure that some of our medical facilities are available for those people who really need them in an efficient manner.
It's interesting to say there about, it's only kind of coming to me now that I'm thinking about our local GA pitch put a walking, running track around the whole area. So I think the idea is that parents can drop off their kids and they can do like a few laps. And, I've definitely availed of it and I thought it's great. And as I was running around, they've actually, you mentioned biodiversity there, they put up some signage of maybe some of the wildlife you might see, or, the kind of green area, the wildflower area. So I suppose where you put down all-weather pitches, you can create an environmentally friendly area as well.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned the GAA. Are you still playing, Meghann?
I don't. I actually went back playing football a few years ago, but currently not playing. But I love watching. So,
well, from my research, the GAA are probably best of breed from a national governing body. They have what's called the GAA Green Clubs, and so they help clubs to start on their journey. So, for example, there are three pillars to sustainability. Environmental is the one we always think of, right? But there is social and economic also. So all GAA clubs need to be viable. And for them to be viable, they need to be able to cover their costs. And we know there's an energy crisis, or certainly our average gas price, for example, is extremely high. So what steps could each club take to reduce their energy costs? And the GAA have a playbook that allows clubs to say, well, we'd love to see what we can do to reduce our energy costs, whether that's put solar panels in, put EV chargers in, improve their facilities BER, their building energy rating. So all of these efforts you wouldn't immediately think about from a sporting context, right? So there's the facilities, there's the health aspect of sport, and then there's the economic aspect of sport as well.
Speaking of, I suppose, bigger sports then on the bigger level, we've touched on kind of local and community. Tell us how the likes of those are working towards sustainability and maybe your own role with them.
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to work with Leinster Rugby as part of my Masters. And really what we wanted to identify was how can Leinster Rugby establish their social and environmental sustainability strategy. There's a huge amount of great effort and work going on within Leinster Rugby from a sustainability perspective. And it was just bringing all of those independent activities together in a cohesive plan and strategy. Their plan will be very much in line with World Rugby's plan. And World Rugby have led a scientific investigation into the impact of global warming on the sport. And they looked at 10 different countries across the world, and they did some testing with what would 2 degrees centigrade do to impact the sport. And it is extremely far-reaching in terms of spectator experience, players' health and safety if the pitches are too hard, as well as the brand itself. Are you putting your spectators and players at risk? Well, maybe your commercial partnerships wouldn't be too enthusiastic to continue that partnership as well. So the IRFU, Leinster Rugby are all exploring how they can develop strategies within their own 4 walls as part of the events that they participate in and manage, and then using their influence across their player communities and their fan and sponsor communities as well. So there's a huge opportunity for sporting organisations to influence as well. I think it was a Harvard Business Review where they said actually some sporting clubs and organisations have more credibility than governments and countries at the moment.
Fantastic. I honestly getting a whole new idea of sport, because as mentioned, I myself have played sport for years and I love attending games, and something about sport, it brings everyone together. It's a real sense of community.
And that's another angle, right? There is a whole social inclusion element of sport that brings people together from different demographies, different walk of life, different beliefs. But everyone could be shouting on the red team or the blue team, and they come together. And, you know, sports has that opportunity beside the environmental aspect of the social inclusion aspect.
I'm sure there's so many people listening who are from small clubs and are, want to start with sustainability in the club. Like, where do they start?
Yeah. So, look, I suppose a big elephant in the room for small local clubs is transport. So it's important. Transport creates a lot of carbon emissions. So is there an effective carpooling process that each club has? Can they rotate it? So some parents get the weekend off too. Win-win. The other one is waste management. How are they managing their waste on a day where there's many matches at the club? Do they have clear waste segregation? Because we know the likelihood to increase positive recycling is improved when there are segregated bins. And another opportunity to bring the club together is to contact the deposit return scheme. They have a great community engagement team. We have one active in Harold's Cross where we have our deposit return scheme bin, and the funds from that go back into the club as well. I suppose textiles or kit. My God, how many jerseys, socks, boots, shin pads, gum shields does everyone have in their house? So how can the club at a top level look to make sure that the kit that's used for under 10s this year is used for the under 10s next year? Now, obviously, there's a balance there because some of these kits are sponsored and the sponsor would like to recycle the kit each year, but there's definitely an opportunity to look at how material management is used in each club as well. So they would be pretty simple, straightforward starting points for any club, as long as that the leadership of the club has the passion to go forward with that.
That's very interesting about jerseys, because I remember we used to wear jerseys that belonged to like the women's senior team, and you know, they were way too large on us, but like you just tucked them in and you tightened up your belt. And I think that's jerseys and the materials being used, as you mentioned, because a lot of them probably contain the likes of polyester. So how can they maybe bring out a sustainable material as well for jerseys? There's so much to think about.
And in fairness, a lot of the main sports manufacturers, sports kit manufacturers that we would be familiar with are introducing more and more of their product lines that are from recovered plastic. Right. And you know, for a lot of that, again, just to tie back into the deposit return scheme, that's generating a vast amount of recycled material that can be used in the circular economy in Ireland. Right now, much of that is imported, or much of our waste is exported. Now, if we can have the infrastructure in Ireland to use the plastic that we've captured through deposit return schemes from many local community clubs, it becomes a virtuous circle, and that's the circular economy in action. And you know what it also does, Meghann, as well? Back to the Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 4, quality education. Having those bins visible, letting the kids know what's going on, you're creating a conversation for the next generation to be more conscious of their consumption and more conscious of, well, if I buy this product, what am I going to do with it afterwards as well? So continuous education at all levels, from primary, secondary and within the sporting environment as well, I think is really critical for us to continue to make inroads against some of the carbon emissions and the climate challenges we're facing.
From setting goals to scoring goals, let's hear from Sean. Sean, tell us all about your role in Bohs.
Okay, well, I guess it's a little bit unusual. CNN called it the first climate justice role in all of football. So it's not like sustainability typically is, although we are concerned about the sustainability of the club. And we're doing work currently around like putting solar at our training facility and reducing waste on match days and those type of things. They're important. But ultimately, sports has a bigger role in the climate crisis. It's hard sometimes to illustrate this. The best example might be that we're a member of a European network of clubs called the European Football for Development Network. It's 175 clubs all around Europe, and they range from the Manchester Cities of the world or the Paris Saint-Germain's, huge clubs, down to clubs much smaller than our own. And I estimate, based on my own calculations, that we're responsible for about 6 million tonnes of CO2 every year going into the atmosphere, which sounds like a lot. But when you stack it up against EU emissions, it's about 1/4%. 1/4% is important. We have to reduce that, and we are. It's the law by the Paris Agreement and how that's been codified in Europe. But the fans of those same clubs have about 60% of the emissions of all of Europe, right? So if we want to be catalytic and really like play a significant role in the climate transition, it's about reaching our fans. And then the question becomes, how do you reach your fans? It's not about preaching. It's not about telling people. Like, there's this big thing about raising awareness. People are aware. People are aware of the solutions. They just can't afford them in most cases. And so is there a way that we can use the economies of scale of football and football fandom to make solutions accessible where they otherwise wouldn't be for people who are maybe typically left out of the conversation on the climate crisis? And so that's why it's a climate justice role and not a sustainability role, if you know what I mean. And that's our focus.
How did your role actually come about? Because I'm sure when you studied, did you think you'd end up in a football club?
I studied physics.
Wow.
I had no intention of ending up anywhere near any of this. I came at all of this from a more human rights lens. I worked in many countries around the world, sort of in a development context, realised how significant the climate crisis was, and ended up spending 6 years working with Mary Robinson in her Climate Justice Foundation. And when that came to an end, we'd spent a lot of time at the UN level, where there were some big concepts being discussed, like climate justice and just transition, and how gender intersects with the climate crisis, or how Indigenous people's rights intersect. And they're very big, broad ideas, but actually operationalising them, making them real for communities, there was still a big gap in 2016, 2017. And so we concluded the foundation in 2018, and I actually got in a camper van and I drove around Ireland talking to farmers. I was doing a piece of work with Task, the think tank for action on social change. And I wanted to understand I wanted to take the most intractable challenge in the Irish context, which was farming, I thought, and how might we pull that apart a little bit and understand what is the path forward, a constructive path forward where people can buy into an idea that's good for them and good for the planet. And that ultimately ended up with a piece of research called the People's Transition. And the People's Transition is a model, and a Task are still rolling this out all around the country. It's really exciting. But it's a model for participative approaches to climate action where you actually take the assets of the transition and you put them into the control of the community so that they benefit socially, economically and environmentally from the transition. And that work that was kind of during the pandemic. I'm a member of Bose, have been for a long time, and I approached the club and said, there's a possibility here for Bose to be an anchor institution in a model of climate action that's really good for our local area. And because Bose, for those who don't know, we're 100% fan owned, so we're quite different to typical football clubs. We're made up of people from our community. They're all the owners of the club. And so it's our responsibility to give back in ways to the members. And the biggest crisis they're facing is the climate crisis, but also we have other intersecting challenges that, we've a cost of living crisis, we've a housing crisis, we've all sorts of things going on in our immediate community. So the question became, how can Bose maybe be an anchor institution that would allow the climate action to take place, but would also look to improve the well-being of our members? And that's what the role became.
It's actually fascinating, even just the work you did, like Mary Robinson. She's obviously an absolute icon and a legend. And I'm sure that work, as you said, you came back to Ireland then and it's brought you to where you are. Talk to us about some of the work that has gone on in Bose, because they're one of the clubs I'd say I've heard more about in mainstream media because of their work, not just in the League of Ireland. It's actually, they are making headlines because they are leading the way. And I think a lot more clubs will be following suit.
Yeah, well, it should be said, it's very much not just in climate. Like we've got very exciting programs on anti-racism and reintegration, working within Mountjoy Prison. I have some wonderful colleagues doing blind football and walking football, and really good initiatives that are whole of community initiatives. And our motto at the club is to use football as a force for good, right? And so I wasn't doing something new at the club. It was very much in keeping with the ethos that was already there. And I think the members respond really positively to that. There was a lot of noise when the appointment was made that maybe we should have been signing midfielders and not climate justice officers. At the time I was totally voluntary, and now we actually are able to sustain our own work through the funding we get. So it's good. We don't take anything away from the club side, the football side. It's all our climate work is our climate work. But I think what the climate piece does and how there's a real opportunity. We're shaping narratives all the time as we move through this sustainability crisis, right? People don't really know where we're going. None of us do. None of us have a clear idea of what a safe, fair future looks like. We've maybe pieces of it, and different people have different pieces. But fundamentally, it should come from communities. It should be community-led to the extent that it can be, right? Now, the real advantage with football is that football clubs exist in every single community in every country in the world. Like the UN doesn't have a network like that. So if we figure out a part of the solution in Dublin, we can spread it around the world actually quite a lot quicker than others. So we have a project going at the minute called Football for Climate Justice, and we have partners in Spain, Real Betis, 2 clubs in Germany, Werder Bremen and St. Pauli. We have FC Twente in the Netherlands and Ferencváros in Hungary. And so this is an amazing, positive network of clubs trying to redefine that narrative of what sustainability is in the football context, trying to not let it be defined really narrowly as the operations of the clubs or fan travel or these types of things. Because if football clubs go that way, and if sport goes that way, it will reduce that small percentage of emissions that it's responsible for. But the bigger picture transition will be missed, and the opportunity to play a very significant role in that will be missed. So it's exciting to have clubs out there that are beginning to advocate this climate justice approach, and that's thanks to I suppose, the openness of Bose to take me on in the role and to grow that piece of work that we started 4 years ago.
And then what exactly is happening in the club in terms of, I suppose, climate justice and sustainability coming together? Like, what are the club doing to make the difference?
We have a programme running currently called The Spark. The idea behind it is ultimately to create a climate cooperative. Our club is a cooperative. It's owned by the fans. We believe that the workers of the climate transition should be able to own some of the companies that come out of the climate transition. And so The Spark is a project that ultimately will end up with the creation of a climate co-op in Phibsborough, under the club or beside the club if you want, the Bohemian Climate Cooperative. And how we're getting there at the minute is we're running free education programs, and anyone is welcome to sign up for these. But we've got programs that encapsulate bike mechanics, solar, off-grid solar, and energy efficiency. That's an 8-week program, gets people up to a level of engagement, not just in the subject matter, but also in their community. At the end of it, we're developing care and repair teams, people who will go out into the community and help families or households make basic energy efficiency savings, or like put flow restrictors on their taps, or draft excluders, or the types of things that could help families have warmer homes, right? Make it real tangible in the community. And community helping community, mutual aid. So there's that piece of work that's ongoing. On a slightly different subject, we're launching a program called the Clean Air Champions League, which is going to be another assortment of clubs from around Europe. We'll all put air quality monitors at our stadium, and we'll educate the public on air quality, how it intersects with the climate crisis, and how they can advocate for better air quality. Actually, in Phibsborough, we often surpass EU thresholds for safe air, because it's the only place in the country, I believe, that 2 national roads meet in an urban setting. And so you've got quite a lot of air pollution from traffic. So that's a piece of work. We have a community supported agriculture project where 50 families now get their veg directly from a farmer who brings it once a week to the ground. And it helps also then, we're not good at this, we have to get better at it, but the community then are supposed to go and help the farmer with the farming as well. That hasn't really kicked in. We'll push that on again next year. But it's wonderful. Like, there's a waiting list now to get onto the CSA, and it gives us opportunities to look and bring in more farmers. And the farmer himself has said to me, it's a Beach Park Eco Farm out in Clonsilla, that the CSA gives him a guaranteed income throughout the year, which allows him to plan his year better, right? So that's a really exciting project.
And are club members buying into it? Because, you know, a lot of times people don't like change. They kind of like, they want to be able to go to the match and they want to be able to go home. But the fact that the future you're building for the club obviously is making it sustainable long term. And are the members on board?
I don't know. I can't speak for all. There's definitely people who aren't if you look at Twitter and you look at our Facebook groups. But like, I think also you get a lot of noise from a minority. We asked our fans as part of our Football for Climate Justice project, we surveyed the fans quite heavily. And one thing that came back was 75% of all of our consortium partners, the fans were saying, we want this to happen. So that's a positive sign. Bose fans specifically, that figure was 85%. So that's a really good sign. Now, there's maybe a selection bias. Maybe the people who really hated didn't do the survey, right? Like, there's a chance that happened. But I'd be confident that a lot of fans are buying into the idea. But more importantly, one of the questions we asked on that survey was, do you ever struggle paying your electricity bills or your heating bills? And they said, we got a response back to 43% fans do at least some of the time. Right now, if we're thinking about an energy transition, or we're thinking of rolling out a transition that people have to pay for, and yet people are struggling just to pay for their existing energy bills, we're never going to get there. So that's what set us off on the work that we do. We actually teamed up with Friends of the Earth on a project called Levelling the Playing Field, and we did a deep dive with about 15 or 20 of our members on the barriers that they face in accessing things like retrofits or renewable energy. And it was very insightful because we were able to categorize our members who couldn't access these things into 4 categories. Like, you had renters, you had kind of pragmatists, people who were a little bit wary of the money they might spend. There was what we called step-by-steppers, who maybe had a new family and couldn't do the whole deep retrofit thing, could only do a little bit at a time. And then there was older people Like older people face an array of challenges that are never considered in the climate transition. One of them is like maybe you can get a grant for attic insulation, but that grant doesn't cover clearing out your attic. And if you're old and you can't do that, you're never going to avail of the grant, right? You're never going to avail and your home is going to be cold. So we recognise that actually the idea that there's a one-size-fits-all solution at a national level for any of these things is wild. We've got 2,500 members and we were able to create 4 categories of the barriers faced. So, translate that onto a national level. We need not to be afraid of the complexity of the transition and the fact that it's a door-to-door transition. And that's why our care and repair teams and ideas like that are about going door-to-door, about going out into the community and really like recognising that a big part of this will be mutual aid, mutual support and working with each other to kind of achieve the transition.
What an incredible community you've built. It's fascinating how you're so much more than just a football club. And I think when I'm listening to you, it sounds, obviously I know you're in Dublin City, but almost it sounds kind of like you're nearly like a village in rural Ireland, the way you all are working together. And I think that's what's so important is community, because at the end of the day, as you mentioned, like a lot of people are struggling now, and it's the little things that can really make a big difference. Like, how do you think clubs, not just Bohs, but all clubs around Ireland, can address the issue of potentially urban areas sprawling, losing pitch space, dealing with like construction going up, then your own pitch flooding, and then with winter time, like you don't want to say to children, sorry, you can only go outside now during the summer, we can't let you out at winter, because everyone at the end of the day, we all need to get outside into fresh air.
I don't mean to take it totally away from the question, but like the threat is so huge and so real that and sport's ability to bring people together, to unite en masse, is so profound. 5 million people showed up on the streets of Buenos Aires to celebrate Argentina's last World Cup victory. That's a sense of belonging. It's a sense of connection. We have to impress upon people this is a transition unlike anything humanity has ever gone through before, and we have to be the ones to do it. Like, it's not our grandchildren, it's us, it's our generation, and we need to go to the places where people already congregate and really plan and organise and educate ourselves so that we can do the much bigger steps necessary. And if sport is the way to get to people, maybe the waterlogged pitches is the beginning of the conversation, but it has to end with, we've got fossil fuel companies that have to come to an end. They cannot continue, or we're in huge trouble.
Maybe that's it though, as you said, maybe we start with the younger generation, or actually, sorry, our own generation. And teach them about, as you mentioned, the bigger picture is actually, well, as you mentioned, all the fossil fuel companies, so maybe that's where we start. And because I think it would be a shame for clubs to have to be set up in other areas just because, like, sorry, we actually can't play in there because there's nothing left. Yeah,
100%. And actually, something, like, it's funny, I mentioned about driving around the country in the van. One of the big things I kept encountering was, like, people be like, I don't care about the climate change, but what I do care about is none of the young people are staying in this area because of out-migration. They're going to the cities, they're leaving Ireland because the jobs aren't here anymore. And again, back to the idea, like, the reason we're trying to establish a cooperative in Phibsborough is because I learned from Donald Sheehan down in the Bride Valley and others about what cooperatives did for rural Ireland at one point in time, creating jobs, creating opportunities. Energy cooperatives, retrofitting cooperatives, transition cooperatives could rebuild that social fabric in rural Ireland. And you mentioned about it sounding like a little bit like a village, how we're talking, but the reality is that people will benefit from this transition. And those people will either be the people who benefit from the current economy, which is very unequal and puts people to the pin of their collar, or it will be fairer and it'll share opportunity better, and it will address some of those massive gaps that we have in terms of out-migration, GA clubs closing because they can't field the team, like those issues. And maybe that's how we get to people. Maybe it's like, we could really get some jobs into this area if we thought about this transition in the right way, if we thought about how we're going to address it as a community together.
Like you mentioned there a while ago that, people are complaining on social media that, why aren't they bringing in new players or, getting a new midfielder in? And I think, the players themselves are they're so well known, like they're celebrities in the community and around the country and probably in Europe. And, are they buying into it as well? Like, do they understand? Like, I know they're there to do their job. Their job is to play and hopefully win. But do they understand what you're trying to achieve here? And are they the ones kind of helping you get the message home?
Well, yeah, I think it kind of depends. So, obviously footballers have a great platform. You don't want to kind of trivialize it. You know what I mean? Like there's ways where it fits and there's ways where it doesn't fit. I was very lucky when I started that Georgie Kelly was playing up front for us, and he was at the same time studying climate finance in Smurfit. So he was a really good voice for the work. A more recent example, when our club captain, who's on his way back from injury, Keith Buckley, first picked up his injury, he actually helped me with the Friends of the Earth research, which looked at kind of getting warmer homes for people. He rang our older members. He just sat in the office one day calling some of the older members and seeing if they'd like to get involved and talk to me about the programme, which, getting a call from your club captain about it is pretty cool. Like using players' platforms, it's been done very well in some places. One of our club partners is Real Betis. We do quite a bit of work with Real Betis in Sevilla in Spain. And they have a player there who formerly played with Arsenal, who's very kind of clued in on climate and sustainability and has done really good work for them in terms of promoting it. I think when there's an authentic connection, one thing we heard, so I did a piece of research actually for the UN 2 years ago on how we could use sport. They've got a framework called the Sports for Climate Action Framework. It's a really, really good initiative, and it has governing bodies and media and sports teams and individual players in some instances. There's certain times when it can be very good, and there's certain times when actually you could damage what you're trying to say by having the wrong message, right? So one example that springs to mind was an event at the BBC last year where they gave an award very explicitly to a young athlete who had refused to fly to Summer Games because they were in New Zealand. She didn't want that impact on the planet, and they gave her a Young Ambassador Award. And then the very next person up to receive an award had flown in from California just for that event. So, we have to be real about these things. I think sometimes then the label of hypocrite can be easily bandied about if someone takes a stand that is based on something that's insincere. We did a survey with a piece of research and a survey for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We asked what fans wanted from clubs in this regard and sports organisations. And a lot of people were quite positive about sports stars being ambassadors, and a lot of people were quite negative. And I think that reflects the risk. I think if it's sincere, if it's authentic, it can be really, really positive. I think if it is insincere, people will see through it immediately. It'll be interesting. The COP, the climate negotiations, take place in Brazil this year, right? So there's a real coming together of two worlds there, football and climate. And there's already ideas, and there's an organisation called Earth FC, which are already preparing for that. And I know Lionel Messi, Argentinian, obviously not Brazilian, but he's been trying to become a little bit of an ambassador in this space. So let's see. Maybe we could see some significant role model emerge as a champion for this in sport.
So that's it for this week's episode of Re-Energise. A huge thanks to our guests. Don't forget to subscribe and spread the word about the show. Send this to your sports fanatic friends. We'll see you in 2 weeks for the next episode.
This podcast was produced and recorded by the Podcast Studios for ESB. Production and editing by Connor Reid. Project management by Katie Flannery. Original music by Dan Wilcox. Video editing by Judy Hassett. Graphics and design by Matt Mahon.